Well, today it's my great pleasure to talk to guitar virtuoso Craig Wagner, who will be bringing his trio to the Café on Sunday, June 28th, as part of the Louisville Jazz Society's signature series. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me today, Craig.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That's great pleasure. So you've played in so many different contexts, different musical genres, different roles as a musician. Last time I saw you, you were playing with Stuart Copeland, which was really fun.
Oh,
Yeah.
you were at that. That was
Yeah. But the first time I actually heard you play, recommendation of a friend, was on the interwebs, and you were playing a Bach two-part invention.
Oh, yeah. Wow,
And I wondered, how do you make the guitar do that? I mean, I play a little piano, and I find those inventions hard to play on the piano, let alone doing them on a guitar.
Well, at the time, I had a long, I had kind of a long-term goal to work up a couple of those. In my ill-fated attempts to play the piano, maybe in college era, I had started to work through that particular one on the key. I don't have anything together anymore, but I was like, I was getting into a lot of solo stuff on guitar, a lot of like contrapuntal kind of guitar, two-line stuff. There was a West Coast guy. He's since passed away, a guy named Jimmy Weibel, who was incredible at that kind of almost fugal kind of improvisation. Ted Green too. They all tend to be West Coast guys for some reason. So it didn't really come as much from classical guitar as it did just thinking about the possibilities of getting that independence of thinking together in ways that I could eventually parlay that into some form of improvisation. Not at that level, obviously, that would take years, and that's still a work in progress. And one that I've somewhat abandoned or forgotten about in the meantime, but it did teach me a lot, doing a lot of those kind of arrangements. And the main thing was trying to get, that independence of thought, independence of two complementary melodic lines, which is something on some level I do when I'm playing solo and improvising or playing in duo settings without bass players, which I find myself in that situation a lot, which is really fun. And now I enjoy it. Originally, it was very challenging. Didn't quite know what to do. But that type of stuff, even though it was non-improvisational, it kind of helped me develop a concept maybe, for how to approach that. And then, otherwise it's just like the thumbs playing the bass notes, and it's just like Chet, so that's where a lot of that stuff came from. I'm not really doing it like a classical player, although I do play with my fingers.
Can you talk a little bit about that? It's a finger picking technique, right, that you're playing with?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, talk a little bit about how you came to that.
Just it's banjo technique, really. It's just the three finger kind. That's what I mean. It's not like a very prim and proper kind of classical technique where you're using everything. I do everything with just the thumb and two fingers. Coming out of that Chet Atkins, Jerry Reed kind of. Although Jerry used thumb and middle ring, he didn't use his index finger, which is really weird. He'd do all these crazy rolls without his index finger. But it was basically a three-finger technique, thumb and two fingers, Earl Scruggs kind of thing. I had the great fortune to be around a lot of incredible banjo players in my day, and in my rubbing shoulders with some bluegrass influences and stuff. Although I'm not, any kind of legit bluegrass player, I do love it. It was one of my first loves on guitar, next to just a lot of rock and roll and shred. I was all over the place, It would be like Hank Williams, and then like Yngwie, and then Eddie, and then, Andy Summers, and then Doc Watson. It was like, that time in your life when you're not, that doesn't seem schizophrenic at all to you just like all that kind of stuff.
Well, the previous time I saw you play was with the Louisville Orchestra doing the banjo solo in Rhapsody in Blue with Teddy.
Oh yeah, that was fun. That was kind of impromptu, because originally, there is the original score for that, the Grofé score, I believe, has it has a banjo part in it. And it's a quite good banjo part. You're not just chunk, 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 chord symbols and whatever. It's actually, you're playing woodwind lines, you're playing some of the themes, you're doubling what the piano's doing times. It's a very well thought out banjo part, but often it's not included because it's listed as optional. And, the union rules, if a part is listed as optional, they don't have to hire for it. But if it's listed in the part, if like there's 3 oboes instead of 2 oboes, they have to hire a 3rd oboe. They can't just go, oh, you know what, we're fine. So I never knew that, but that it's usually a matter of pure economy that they exclude it, or just finding someone that plays banjo that maybe there's not a lot. It's not an instrument where a lot of people read on. They typically hire guitar players and kind of adapt. But yeah, that's a really fun banjo part. And then Teddy was like, oh, let's just trade some 4s in the middle of it. I'm like, okay. And he just so that was really fun and kind of unplanned. And
so you can't escape the banjo.
No, you can't. So it's very cool. So it's weird because I don't play classical guitar. I don't play banjo. I mean, I can kind of double on it, but it's much like, if many sax players, how they consider their flute playing or their clarinet playing. They can get the job done on the part, they're not Ricardo Morales, or James Galway or something when they're playing those instruments, but they can get it done. So it's something that I've always loved playing around with and have been very influenced by its techniques because it always felt natural to me. That's the first way I ever played with the guitar. And I just kind of adapted it to the guitar as opposed to playing the banjo, and growing up, Eddie Van Halen days, I wasn't going to pick up a banjo. And actually there wasn't, bluegrass, this was the late 80s, right? So it's like, the banjo's cool now. Banjo wasn't cool. What was cool was like shred guitar and like the post-punk stuff and, so it was like Dinosaur Jr. and Husker Du but then like Eddie, but then the Police and Rush and, but then Tony Rice and Doc Watson, so it was like kind of all over the place.
You just soaked it all up.
Yeah. So, but anyway, long story short, it's basically a thumb and 2 fingers is what I did. Later on, I wanted to get more volume as a banjo player would when I'm playing acoustic guitar. I mean, it's fine playing with your nails or bare finger when you're playing electric. You just it's a different tone, but you can just turn it louder. But I was finding myself in situations a lot where I'd be playing acoustic guitar and I needed to have the volume of a flat picker, with my fingers. So I started doing that and never really stopped. There's, being around Steve Cooley around here in town and another friend of mine named James McKinney, who was a big influence on me as far as that, just amazing, like technician on the banjo, as well as just a fantastic banjo player. Of course, Steve played with the Dillards and everybody, and all those guys in the Bluegrass Alliance back in the day, and is friends with all of them. My friend James played with Vassar Clemens and, a lot of other people. But that's really where that comes from. And there's a guitar player up in Ohio a lot of people should know about, frightening player like Scotty Anderson. I don't know if you've ever heard of Scotty Anderson.
I haven't.
He was a thumb pick guy, fingers guy. Plays a little different, like, because he mixes using the thumb pick as a flat pick and then puts his fingers in there. And like, I'm kind of just always doing this. So those were kind of the influences. None of them were jazz players or even guitar players a lot of times. So all my kind of influences were from bluegrass or the shred guys or, country players and banjo players, so it's very weird,
Well, I think what to me is striking about it is the way you make the guitar sound like an ensemble, where you're playing the bass line chords and a melody line by using that technique.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot, because you can, where you would have just strummed a chord, just simple things where, just like if you're doing it on a piano, well, this voice can enter, and I might have my hands hovering over that voicing, but I can play it at different rhythmic times. You know, if I'm using my fingers, I have more control over that, so I can get more interaction going on with the band when that happens, or I can cover more territory contrapuntally when I'm playing myself. So like this weekend, for example, I get to play with one of my dearest friends and favorite drummers in the world, Mike Hyman. And so, you know, we totally get in that zone in terms of that. So when we can kind of break up the time in different ways, it's you know, everyone knows. That's what I love about playing with Lee, and what I love about playing with Mike. Everyone knows where one is. Well, usually, sometimes on Mike's solos, he'll get me lost, but like most of the time I'm there. But like, you know, we're not like counting on someone to like hold us in. You know, there's an internal clock there. We can play around with it. Usually, if two people are out, one person is in. Sometimes that person is me, you know, and then there's like a torrent around me, or I'm doing something and then they're holding it down. So that's the great thing about a trio, is it's just that, you know, nothing wrong with a cube or a square, I guess, but it you know, there's something about just the art of the trio that I've always loved, and there's not a lot of safety there, you know. Same with playing duo and solo. Maybe it's the Catholic in me, just punishing myself for playing these things. You know, it's much easier to play in a larger group, but I find this more, I don't know, more rewarding, you know, to play in those kind of things where you're kind of teetering on the edge a lot sometimes. Right. That's what I love playing with those guys. And that's what, you know, to the extent what that technique kind of affords me, to a certain extent, kind of a poor man's piano trio kind of vibe, but you're doing it on guitar. I mean, that's kind of sort of the goal. Right. It's not, don't always get there. And that's, again, always a work in progress. But those are the things that kind of influence me in that kind of scenario.
So are there, beyond the bluegrass and pickers you've mentioned, the guitar players you've mentioned, are there any jazz guitarists who influence the sound you produce?
I mean, in that vein, in that trio kind of vein, in the solo vein, you know, two Canadian guitar players, Ed Bickert, big influence, and Lenny Breau, one of my heroes, who came from that whole Chet country scene and kind of developed into a jazz player and an improviser.
Were his parents country players?
His parents were country players, and he was Lenny was, you know, a prodigy, you know, growing up, and they called him Lone Pine, and they had their own little, you know, traveling family band, and they do the whole circuit and stuff. And, you know, he learned early to sing harmony and to hear the harmonies and play different parts on the guitar. And he worshiped Chet and Merle Travis and Jerry Reed, and kind of built on that. And there's these early recordings of him playing that stuff, and then just kind of taking it out and then coming back in. You know, he'd be playing like Cannonball Rag or you know, Windy and Warm or something like that. And then suddenly he's, you know, he's just improvising over that. A famous version of him playing is Freight Train, of all things, the Elizabeth Cotten tune that Chet played. So yeah, and I've related to him a lot, even though he's, you know, he's Canadian, he was still kind of a country boy, a Canadian country boy, you know, in that kind of sense. And so I related to that from him. Ed Bickert, who was just incredible, it was kind of like from that Jim Hall kind of approach, but a lot more. He wasn't a finger player at all, a pick player, but he had that pianistic kind of quality to his voicings and his trio playing. And then of course Jimmy Rainey, you know, who I had the good fortune of, you know, knowing and playing with to some extent, in some senses, like kind of studying with, in the sense that he was doing some master classes when Jeff Sherman was doing a lot of guitar clinics during the summer at Bellarmine.
Jeff Sherman was your guitar teacher at Bellarmine.
When I was at Bellarmine, right? So Jeff had that great guitar clinic that would happen. He brought like Tal Farlow and Howard Roberts and Jim Hall. Jimmy was a fixture there for a long time until he became too ill to do it. Herb Ellis, Cal Collins, you know, Kenny Poole, who is should be more well known, fantastic fingerstyle player. from Cincinnati. God, I'm forgetting a lot of people, but those were some of the,
Some of the
just
big
getting to drive Jim Hall around, pick him up at his hotel, and
well, that must be great.
always wore this ratty old Rooster Run hat, that I had, like I wore all through high school and college, and he just thought that was the funniest thing. And at the end of the week, I went down there because it's in Bardstown. I bought him like the really obnoxious orange camo one, and like, here, Jim. And he was really funny. And then he sent me a letter back, like, it was so cool. But those kind of things were really invaluable for me at the time. And then,
So how old would you have been when that was happening?
18, I guess, 19,
kind of a formative period.
Yeah, definitely. And, Scott Henderson, who became a really good friend of mine, not the LA Scott Henderson, the Scott Henderson from here, who had been a student of Jimmy's, and he would invite me out to some of his gigs that Jimmy and him would play, just duo, which was incredible. It was at the old Zenas. I don't know if you remember that, on Third and Market Street, the corner there.
A little time.
Yeah, it was incredible. In those times, I was probably 17 then. I was probably a senior in high school. But you could, as long as you didn't sit at the bar, you could kind of sneak in, have a Coke, and like listen to at least that it wasn't policed, at the time. So I could get away with, as a teenager. Mary Jean was really sweet. She was a woman that owned it. And she just let me come in and listen to them play, carry Jimmy's amp out to his little polytone out to his car for him. And so that was, where do you get to do stuff like that? And it's weird that in a town like this, that actually existed. And Scott Henderson was an incredible influence on me and good mentor as well. He's very kind to me, through gigs, a lot of gigs my way. He was very much a first call kind of guy around town. And so kind of helped me get out there. And I took some lessons with him and just hung around with him a lot too, back in those days. Yeah.
So I'm interested, given that you have this influence of bluegrass, and of course most guitar players of your age, you start with the rock and roll.
I definitely started with the rock and roll too, but yeah, it was just all over the place.
Well, I was just going to ask you, given you have all these influences and all these places you came from, what ultimately drew you to jazz? What about the genre was most interesting to you, so that it's what you're pursuing most now?
With jazz? What's interesting to me about it? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I mean,
what drew you to that form?
Just the form, just the thing. I mean, I even did this even when I was a teenager. I loved just improvising. At the time, it was probably just just shreddy blues rock kind of stuff that I was doing. But I just love to take tunes, sometimes to the chagrin of my bandmates, and I wouldn't want to play them exactly the same all the time, and I'd still do that. And I'd kind of learn that, there's this thing called fusion and jazz where you can kind of be a rock guitar player but kind of do that, but it's a little more, so it was just the fact that it was so much more challenging, and that was like at the core of the music was improvisation and thinking like a group and interacting and listening to each other, which was so much more fun than always playing it exactly the same. Although I have great respect for that, than people that do that. I'm way too flighty for my attention to be held by that. I get bored too easily. So that was what it was. And I'm realizing that yes, jazz is a like a what, like meaning it has a tradition and a whole set of standards and things, but it's also a way of approaching music and being an improviser. So and even that word in some sense sometimes gets a little old-fashioned in terms of describing what improvised music is. And some people, I know we have to call it something, but some people even get let's move on from the word jazz or whatever. But it's basically just improvised American music is what I'm doing it, because I might I'll play an Everly Brothers or Hank Williams tune just as soon as I'd play a Cole Porter tune or a Coltrane tune. And I probably will this weekend too, if there's something along those lines, because it's just, it's all such great music, and to me, it's all on the same through line, So yeah, I'm still kind of that kid that doesn't make any kind of distinction between, Coltrane or Hank Williams. it's all good. It's all good music, and
you can play with it all.
Yeah, you can, and there've been players, Bill Frisell has really proven that a lot and has quite an audience, even outside of straight ahead jazz people, although he has immense amount of respect and support in that straight ahead scene. He also has all these fans. Right. It's not like he's pandering to that by, maybe some really, people that are really into the tradition of it might balk at it to an extent. That's definitely not me, but
I just think they haven't heard Bill Frisell play.
Yeah, it's such, it's so beautiful. Any song that he has in his hands, he has such respect and reverence for, and he just, as one of my friends always says about people, they're a song killer. Once that person covers that song, you can't unhear that version of this. That becomes the version of the song. You know what I mean? Even if it wasn't the original version. So I think he has that ability, and play, there's a lot of players like that, but I think his success in that way was kind of proof that works, and that was some, always some validation for me, because I'd always kind of played around with that same kind of thing and kind of felt on the fringes of the music. I was always too rock for jazz, too jazz for rock, too country for either one of them, and I didn't really felt like I fit, honestly, in any of those forms. Still feel that way to an extent. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Right. Well, you've taught at Bellarmine and U of L since around 2003 or so, right? It's been a while. And I've heard you say that you encourage students, and this is your phrase, to chase the sound in their head.
Yeah.
Or more traditionally, to find their own voice.
Yeah.
So, can you tell me a little about the sound that you'll be chasing with the trio at the LJS show this Sunday?
Well, I think you'll hear a mixture of those influences for sure. I would just say that there's a echo of a lot of different types of American music going on, not just straight ahead jazz, definitely. And have some good compatriots there who are kind of like-minded in that sense, who have great reverence for the standards. And we will play a whole lot of standards. I might throw an original or two in there, or an original takes on songs that are a little left field of maybe the canon, right. But that'll be kind of the sound, is sort of having those songs at the center of that, and we're kind of just improvising as one does, improvising our versions of them in real time. There will be some things that are fixed, but it's very much, always kind of lightning in a bottle in terms of recreating those things. I've found, especially when I get to play with a trio like this.
Right. So can you tell me a little bit more about the trio? It's Mike Hyman and Lee Puckett.
Mike Hyman and Lee Puckett on bass. Lee plays electric, but also plays some upright. But usually when I do these kind of things, it'll be a lot more of the electric bass, drums, electric guitar, and a whole variety of different kinds of grooves, definitely. Things that would lean into more fusion or rock styles, but also stuff that can be very straight ahead, or certainly maybe Brazilian influenced at certain times too, but also just
we're going to step outside America.
Yeah, exactly. or that through an American lens. That definitely, I would never call myself an expert on that, on those styles, but in the way that they've impacted jazz, certainly. So that'll be kind of the aesthetic that we're presenting there. And if
And you
anyone's
played with both Mike and Lee a bunch, right? So there's a lot of history there, and a lot of, you guys know each other.
Yeah, definitely. And we've recorded stuff before and together, and have played. I've played duo actually with each one of them. I know Mike and I really love playing just guitar and drums, which is, no bass, no nothing. That's really a blast. And I've done a lot of duo gigs with Lee in the past. We've done things with bigger groups, things that were not jazz that I've played with Lee and Mike before. It's always just a great treat to get to play with guys like that, because there's just the more you have to explain things or talk things out, it's just it just kind of kills it for me. So I know I can just kind of play and just have a basic sketch of what we're going to do, and we'll turn it into something. And that's always way more fun, because it's a real unique experience that way for us and for the listeners, because there's nothing really very canned about it, even if they're tunes that we've played in the past. But I mean, that's the whole nature of improvised music and jazz in general. So I don't tend to want to have things arranged to death, right? Although I have great respect for that in bands that do that. I love just the immediacy and the intimacy of just kind of playing in the moment and seeing what happens. And that's a reflection of what we are and what that room is, what the energy in that room is, what the sound of the place is. You're all reacting to that. And I feel like if you try to force that and manufacture it and it just doesn't, for me, that doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, and as you said, it's like capturing lightning in a bottle, and when you've got players you comfortable with and you played with before, there's a freedom there.
Absolutely. And that's I don't take that lightly either. I'm super grateful to be playing with guys like this and to have a history with them. And they're just buddies of mine too. So it's that's always important, but they also happen to be outstanding players. So that's a cool bonus.
Yeah. Well, you've recorded a bunch of stuff in the past. I was wondering, beyond the LJS show, what other kind of musical plans do you have for the future? The recordings, shows in the future?
Lately I've been focusing. Carly and I still play a whole bunch with Carly Johnson.
And you guys did a Louisville Jazz Society show during COVID, right? Yes,
we did. We did when they were doing it kind of remotely. Yeah, I think we did one of those. So we're still active doing that. I've been getting a lot more, getting back into more like solo guitar kind of stuff, revisiting a lot of the things you had mentioned, some of that stuff earlier in the interview about those. And so that's something just recently I've been kind of revisiting, is getting more back into that. All the orchestra stuff that I've been doing is really made me think about, approaching the sound of the electric guitar in the same way that I hear, in the same processes that I see and hear my classical musician friends who play at such a high level approach their instruments, and the whole kind of almost pedagogical approach that they have there, and how, in a sense, how lacking that is from the history of electric guitar being so new. It's 80, 75 years old, versus like a 400-year tradition of keyboards or violins or things. It's made me think more about, working on sound, working on phrasing in a different way. Just all the nuance that a classical musician kind of brings to bear: articulation, tone, intonation, vibrato, all those kind of things. It's made me think about approaching the electric guitar more in that way, whatever that means. I'm still figuring that out. But also my son is an oboist. My middle son is an oboist and also plays some saxophone and stuff too. So just being around a lot of that more and seeing him develop that is kind of rekindling some of that for me as far as that interest. So yeah, it's great. My other kids are very musical, so that's kind of some vague plans, I guess, on the horizon, So, but it's more chasing that sound. It always kind of comes back to that. You're never done, right?
Right.
It's never good enough. But
that's exciting for anybody who's listened to you before. So we know there's going to be more exciting stuff to come.
Yeah.
So that's great to hear. Well, there's so much more I'd like to ask you about, but our time is short.
Sure.
Remember the Craig Wagner Trio with Mike Hyman on drums and Lee Puckett on bass will be at the Café in Paristown this Sunday, June 28th at 7 p.m. as part of the Louisville Jazz Society's Signature Series concerts. It's going to be an incredible show, and tickets, I might add, are moving fast, so get yours at the LJS website while they're still available. And remember, LJS members get a discount on those tickets, so you might think about becoming a member. Thanks again, Craig. It was a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Glenn. Yeah, thanks.